This determination never to waste or discard anything was bizarrely applied in a series of paintings begun in 1978. The works were created by urinating on specially prepared canvas.
We used metal powder so it would oxidize and turn green, so it was really sort of beautiful. To me, they looked like Japanese landscapes. My job for a while was to go to the factory, drink 2 cups of coffee, have a B complex, because I discovered that with B complex it makes your urine very yellow, so I gave Andy B complex. We're both piss shy, so we would take turns going in the back and peeing on the canvases.
Catrone sometimes press-ganged people on the street to contribute to what became known, for exhibition purposes, as the oxidation paintings.
Basically, we'd say, we're making these piss paintings, want to come up and pee? And that didn't work as well. I brought up a girl, and a girl squats and just makes a puddle. And Andy went, oh, there's no breaststroke. So we learned the hard way.
Echoes of Warhol's more carefree, outrageous silver factory days were appearing in Andy's new works. Ladies and Gentlemen was a series of portraits of transvestites, characters long since banished as regular visitors from the new business-orientated factory. More extreme was the Body Parts and Torso series, his most sexually explicit works. Male models were recruited by Victor Hugo, the flamboyant boyfriend of fashion guru Holston.
Victor would go to the baths, and we started recruiting these guys. And I was chasing drag queens on the street around the same period, because we were doing the ladies and gentlemen. And Victor's at the baths recruiting these guys for the sex parts, which were called also torsos. You know, then we had the drag queens going on and the piss paintings, so the place was out of control. The new factory was definitely as crazy as the old factory. Just doesn't have the reputation.
In 1980, the Broadway producer Lewis Allen, for whom Warhol had previously designed theatre posters, was so amused by Andy's writings that he decided to adapt them for the stage. It was conceived as a one-man show, or a no-man show, as Allen wanted to call it. But who, or what, could do justice to the deadpan Andy and still hold the stage?
Andy's saying, I want to be a machine, you know, his famous saying about want to be a machine, that would be, and I thought, well, how about a robot? How about a robot?
Warhol was ecstatic about the idea, but didn't realize exactly what would be involved in creating a fully animatronic, life-size replica of himself.
They put gook on and covered my ears and eyes. It was making me sick, and I had a cold, and I had phlegm that I couldn't cough up. It was awful. Then they did my teeth.
What he said was, oh, this is so wonderful because the robot now can go on the talk shows instead of me, because I don't like to do that. And the robot can do all that, and it can do publicity appearances. It can, you know, he was fantasizing that the robot could take over all of his public appearances.
They immediately set to work photographing, videotaping, and cataloging Warhol's essential head and body movements. They asked Andy to demonstrate some of his favorite activities.
Gee, that's easy, isn't it?
Like talking on the telephone.
On the other side, you do it this way.
But Andy the robot was not to be. Even the best Hollywood technicians were defeated by the limited technology available at the time. Andy the artist was also suffering from systems failure, running on empty, waiting for something to juice him up.
Beginning of the 80s, I thought he was going soft. Andy would come in the morning and read the gossip columns, and then I would be the one, Andy, we have to paint. Andy, we have to paint. And you go, in just a minute, in a minute. I had almost become like the wife that you don't listen to anymore. Like, take out the garbage, take out the garbage, take out the garbage. Yeah, honey, yeah.
But salvation was at hand. A group of young artists working in New York in the early 80s had transformed the art scene overnight. They were first-generation Warhol disciples, and like their guru, they embraced fashion, music, and pop culture, only this time with a dash of street. They were all Warhol babies, clamoring at the feet of the Pope of Pop. This is the studio of Kenny Scharf, who exhibited alongside his hero in the 1980 group show, New York New Wave. Scharf customizes anything that stands still for long enough. He even managed to turn Warhol's ever-active camera into an artwork.
It's flattering to have a group of young artists that are, in a way, following your footsteps if their art comes from something you did. I mean, what is better than that? His younger artist friends kind of helped him start to be, experimental again and taking some risks.
In characteristic vampire style, Andy fed on the blood of his young admirers, only too happy to let them take a bite out of him in return. His factory ethic had already redefined the role of the artist in an increasingly mediated world.
When you are making something yourself and you're completely physically involved with it, if you don't get any physical distance from it, it can end up to take the work sometimes in more of a subjective area, more of a subconscious area. And art in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, there's a lot of interest in objective art, which demands a certain amount of distance from the subconscious.
Warhol continued to diversify and commodify himself in the 80s. He even took his frail frame and fright wig onto the catwalk as a model. It was during a fashion shoot in February 1987 that an age-old gallbladder condition suddenly became critical. Warhol was paranoid about going into hospital after his shooting and always said that he'd never survive a second visit. But on the 20th of February, surgery became the only option. He stopped working for the first time in a decade, checking himself into the New York hospital under the name Bob Roberts. The operation was routine and successful, but during his recovery, something went wrong. No one noticed, and Andy quietly died.
There was this fear of him going to the hospital. He had this feeling. No one really knew he was in the hospital because he didn't want anybody to know. And that was it. And then the worst case scenario is, I actually had this conversation with Shelley about 2 o'clock in the morning, was the fact that he may not come out alive. And then the worst case scenario happened. 6:15, you get the phone call.
An autopsy later revealed that Andy's lungs had flooded and he had drowned around 5 a.m., alone, unnoticed, and undocumented. He was 58 years old. In the early hours of the 22nd of February 1987, Andy's studio on East 33rd Street was barricaded in anticipation of the chaos that might ensue when news of his death reached friends, family, associates, and the press. Fred Hughes, along with Vincent Fremont and Andy's lawyer, Ed Hayes, then went to Andy's house. It was Hughes who answered the phone when Andy's brother John rang that morning for his usual chat.
He says, can I speak to Andy? Andy's dead. Andy died. Real crude,
Andy's brothers immediately flew to New York and went directly to his house on East 66th Street.
I run upstairs and saw how they were rooting through the place. And I says, who are you, who are you, who are you, you know. I said, what do you call this, you know. Hell, they must have been there since 7 o'clock in the morning, piling up the stuff, you know.
Andy's will, 5 years out of date, left $250,000 to each of his brothers. His estate, however, was later valued at $600 million.
We miss them. Yeah. Didn't realize he was that famous. Sometimes, you know, it hits you.
Andy's memorial service took place at St. Patrick's Church in Manhattan on April Fool's Day. It was attended by over 2,000 people from every conceivable corner of the culture. For art historian and friend John Richardson, it was an opportunity to put the record straight.
That's what I tried to do when I did my eulogy, to concentrate really on his faith, on his Catholicism, which I think everybody had left out, and which, to my mind, was one of the most important components of Andy's character.
Never take Andy at his face value. The callous observer was in fact a recording angel, and Andy's detachment, the distance he established between himself and the world, was above all a matter of innocence and a matter of art.
Very special morning. I had to go out in the sunlight and have a cry out.
But this was Warhol's funeral, where there was some crying and some sniffing.
This woman is next to me, and she's going, well, I took my little hanky, thinking she was crying. She was doing cocaine.
The souls of the just are in the hand of God, and no torment shall touch them.
After his death, it was discovered that Warhol had been engaged in a vast series of religious paintings based on Michelangelo's Last Supper. In these works, Warhol had returned both to hand painting and to an almost obsessive level of screen printing. When theologian and art historian Jane Daggett Dillenberger first stumbled on them, the paintings had not yet been catalogued. They now constitute the largest body of religious works by any American artist.
This became a kind of obsession with me. They were vastly larger than I had imagined, and there were so many more than I had expected. The results are very thoughtful and challenging, I think.
But are these vast paintings conclusive proof of Andy's truly religious nature? Or is Christ merely a tragic icon, like Marilyn or Jackie Kennedy? Perhaps the Last Supper is just another business lunch at the factory. Maybe the answer lies in this camouflage version.
To me, that's one of the most profound of Warhol's paintings, in a way the most indicative of his own personality. There was a great anxiety in him about religion. Andy went to church, but he wouldn't go to confession. And so, in a way, this was a barrier to him religiously. And there's something of that meaning, I think, in it too.
They are, in a way, I mean, they're about his faith, but he's somehow exorcised the sacred nature of them. His cool would have been blown if he'd made them look sacred or made people want to go into ecstasy. I mean, that's the last thing in the world he wanted. And there's no question of piety, which I think is what's so good about those paintings.
If religious paintings had a religious dimension, it was only in the way in which shoes and Brillo boxes did. You're no longer in the presence of this divine masterpiece. You're in the presence of something that can be repeated and repeated and repeated, repeated and repeated and repeated. People tend to think that you get more religious as you approach death. I think he was always as religious as he ever was.
Whatever his beliefs, even Andy couldn't take it all with him. It took 10 days to auction his personal collection. 3,500 lots, consisting of over 10,000 items. Andy's cookie jar collection was the star turn, selling for over $250,000. Businessman Gedalio Grinberg successfully bid for all of them. Almost.
I have cookie jar in my house that my wife bought it. None of them, no one, compared with anything he bought. Because his eye was very special. He saw art where you and me didn't see it. I was determined to buy all of them. For the first time, my wife gave me permission without arguing with me, except in one case. My wife held my hand and said, "Enough is enough." Like everything in life, you buy one has some meaning. But when you buy 120, this is part of a 120 collection. It's impressive.
This is the official Andy Warhol Museum, which opened in his hometown of Pittsburgh, not in his beloved Manhattan, in 1994. Apart from the Norman Rockwell Museum in Massachusetts, this is the only institution dedicated to the work of a single American artist. The museum's most important holdings aren't necessarily the artworks, but the extensive archives. These include 600 of Warhol's time capsules, boxes and boxes filled with the detritus of each working month at the factory.
It's all worth saving. It almost sounds like Jesus. They're all worth saving, right?
The museum also holds 4,000 of Andy's audio tapes. Warhol began obsessively using his tape recorder in 1965. Andy, the would-be machine, was inseparable from his mini-me.
I have no memory. Every day is a new day because I don't remember the day before. Every minute is like the first minute of my life. I try to remember, but I can't. That's why I got married. To my tape recorder. My mind is like a tape recorder with one button. Erase.
I think that all people who are constantly recording their lives, it's always a hedge against death. It's always a way of saying, this is not going to be lost. I'm going to save it somehow.
One particular tape, now 30 years old, has death literally written all over it. On one of the boxes, in Andy's handwriting, are the words, "Mama died." Having lived with her son for most of his life, Andy's mother Julia had died in 1972, shortly after he'd sent her back to Pittsburgh. He chose not to attend her funeral, nor did he tell a soul about her death. Warhol's Mama Died tape includes a phone call from his brother John, telling him that their mother had died the night before. This was his response.
Don't be too upset, it's just one of those things. I'll send you some money, so you don't have to worry, okay? Don't tell anybody, don't even put in the, actually you shouldn't even put in the paper. Make it the cheapest funeral. You don't have to do it, okay? Look, make it really the cheapest. You just shouldn't do anything. It doesn't really mean anything, John. So, would you do it really the cheapest? Don't even tell anybody. Please. You tell Mama better than that. Okay?
This is Motila Borce in Slovakia, a small town near the tiny village of Mikova, where Andy's mother and father came from. It wasn't just a gold rush that followed Warhol's death. There was also a rush to claim the man himself. Slovakia won. Though little publicized, this was in fact the first Andy Warhol museum, opened in 1991. Supported by Andy's brother John, the museum boasts little more than photocopies or prints of original works, some of Julia's handiwork, a signed soup can, items of Andy's clothing, a pair of his sunglasses, an old tape recorder, the family christening robe, and some papier-mâché American dollar bills. You're just as likely to find the real Andy Warhol here as anywhere else, hiding behind the genuine fakes. Warhol's impact on visual imagery is now so embedded in the culture that it's impossible to take him out of the world around us. In attempting simply to reflect his times, he in fact transformed them, hugely influencing the visual landscape not only of his own century, but also of the new millennium. How can we miss you if you won't go away?
What he did has sifted down into the greater culture, let alone high art, and he's the only one that has that kind of wallop effect. I can't think of a single artist of the post-war period who you could give that same power to.
When O.J. Simpson was in his white Bronco, being followed by the police around the freeways of Los Angeles, I said, God, I wish Andy were alive to see this. This was his dream come true. One boring image being played over and over again on television. The whole country's watching it. It's like a Warhol movie come true. I mean, you know, the news and entertainment have completely merged now, and it's just what Andy sort of loved and in a way prophesized.
I always think it's so funny when they keep saying the Mao paintings. You know, he didn't know who he was, and he couldn't pronounce his name. He probably thought he was the president of China, obviously, but he knew nothing about any of these things. He wrote a check to Bob Colacello for 15 years, but he couldn't pronounce Colacello. He called him Bob Coca-Cola, because that he could figure out. I think unless you approach him as this strange person who persisted, was likable, very sympathetic. I think everybody liked him because they saw there was something wrong there.
I know what made him a great artist to me was his selection of what was done in his studio. Elizabeth Taylor, Elvis Presley, or the soup can, or the Coca-Cola bottle, or the dollar bill, or the flowers, or the cows, and you know, it was just his finger pointing, which goes back to the Duchampian idea of the artist of the future will be somebody who points his finger and it'll be art.
Warhol was an extraordinarily brilliant manipulator of what was essentially one idea. He had one idea in his whole life as an artist, and he then used it and replayed it and redid it and did it and did it. He saw that what struck this shy, poor, bright, scared boy from Pittsburgh as beautiful could be made into a kind of art without any intermediary manipulation, or with a minimum of it, and that it would give a kind of immediacy that meant it was possible to look at a Campbell's soup can or a telephone in somewhat the same way that one would look at the face of Jackie Kennedy in mourning. Now, that's a bizarre idea, but it was a very fresh idea. He saw its philosophical resonance, he saw and felt its erotic resonance, He saw and felt its visual panache, and that for him was a tremendous liberation. And it made a career possible.
Oh, but that won't last very long.